Backendless announced a brand new feature called Codeless programming about a week ago. So if you go to their website, backendless.com, category Backendless News, you'll see this announcement of Codeless programming that was done on the 10th of August 2017, basically 6 days ago. So what is Codeless programming? You can see there they say, welcome to Codeless. It's a system for creating server code without any programming language knowledge. You can design and implement powerful API and Internet of Things, services, and other server-side types of logic with an intuitive graphical user interface. And then they give you some Codeless videos there on how to, the introduction to it, the logic designer, which is really awesome, and then how to do some Alexa skill with Codeless, developing a service and developing an API event handler. And then you can see they've got some quick start guides there, and they've got some documentation. And then also frequently asked questions. What can I build with Codeless? How does it work? And so forth. So you can go through the website here and see what they got to offer. And then always remember to go and ask them questions. This is only 6 days old now when creating this video. So obviously there will be some hiccups. I've already asked them some questions on this, and they've replied really fast within a few minutes after I asked the question. So they're really here to actually help us to get this Codeless programming up and running. So let's take a look at how does this Codeless programming work. So if you're logged into your application and you go down to business logic, this is where you'll find the Codeless programming. You can see Codeless there. Okay, so basically what I want to do in this example for today, or for this video, if you look at my data table quickly, I've got a person class there, or a person table that's got 350 objects inside of it. And you can see my objects has got a name, it's got a number, and a surname. So there's only 3 fields I'm using there: the surname, the name, and the number. And I've numbered my students, or my persons here. I've numbered them from 1 up until 350. Okay, so let's say that we want to retrieve all 350 objects. Now I've done a video like this one just a few videos back, where we did the advanced retrieval of objects, where we retrieve more than 100 objects from a table. So remember, on the free plan, and I'm not sure, I think on the other plans as well, is you can only retrieve 100 objects at a time from a table. So if I want to retrieve all 350, I need to do that in a loop to keep on getting those values. So you can look at the video on the Android coding on how to do that. It's under the video called Advanced Retrieval and Deletion. So I want to simulate what we did there to see how can we retrieve all 350 objects from this table. But now I'm not going to do normal Android coding. I will go to the business logic, create a service there using the Codeless programming, and then use that service in my application, in my Android application, to get the data that I need. Okay, so first things first, let's just talk about how do we retrieve 350 objects again. Because I can only retrieve one page at a time, and you can set the page size to 100, which is the maximum value, it means that I need to know how many times should I run that loop in order to get all the data. So obviously if it's 100 that I can get at a time, and there's 350, you agree that 350 divided by 100, which is the maximum page size, then you'll get 3.5. But I can't retrieve 3.5 times, so I'll need to round it up so that I retrieve it 4 times. So the first time we'll retrieve 100 objects, the second time another 100, which will give me 200, the third time another 100, which will give me 300, and then the last time, which will give me the last 50. So we need to have a rounding up there. Okay, so this is basically just talking about the logic there. But if we go to business logic now, let's see how we can create a new Codeless service here. So I'm going to create there. Click on the plus sign there, and maybe you've got no services there at all. You'll see I've created a few there. So I'm going to put on the plus sign there, and then you're going to go to Codeless, and you can give your service a name. So the name that I'm going to call this service of ours will be Retrieve Data. Let's just call it Retrieve Data, and say save there. And then automatically it asks you for your first method name. You can have more than one method in a service. So the service name is called retrieve data, but the method name will be something like get all data from person table, whatever you want to call your method. And then you need to indicate your REST operation. In this case, we're going to get some values there. If, like for instance, that create 1,000 objects, you'll use the put method there. If you want to delete, you'll use the delete method. So I'm going to go with get there because we want to retrieve all the data from that table. And then the root there, I'm just going to call that same method again, get all data from person table. And then if you want your method to receive some variables there or parameters, you can indicate your parameters here. But I'm not going to receive anything. I just want to return back some data. So I'm going to say save there. And then you can see that it's created a new API service for me. So there's the retrieve data service, and it's got one method, get all data from person table. And you can also see there that little plus there allows you to create a new method again. So you can create as many methods as you like for that specific service. And then when you're done with the service, you can see there's a little download button there where you can download your SDK or your coding for Android, JavaScript, Objective-C, and Swift. Okay, so which will go with the Android Java part there. But downloading now obviously won't work because we still need to set up how this application should work or how this service should work and what it should do. So now you can see at this stage, we've got it like this. So I'm going to go to Codeless quickly. And let's go to, on the right hand side, you can go to your retrieve data there, and there's the method get all data from person table. So it's this one there. And you can see I can move it down, click on it and move it around. I can do whatever I want with this thing now. I can delete it also, but this is the root of your service, so obviously don't delete that one. And then on the left-hand side, you can see that there's a lot of links that we can use there. So if I go to the first part, they say system there. So if I click on logic, you can see there's some logical blocks that I can use in my coding. If I go to loops, you can see there's the different types of loops and how to break out of a loop and so forth that we can use. If you go to date, you can get the date right now. You can set the offset, you can set a date, you can convert. If you go to object, you can create a new object, you can set properties, you can delete an object. If you go to math, you can add or multiply or divide or whatever to variables. You can round. So this is one that we'll probably use to round up that value. So this is just a math function, and by clicking delete or dragging it down to the delete part there, we'll throw it away again. So under math, there's also just setting a value, there's sum of a list, there's remainders, there's random values, and so forth. If I go to text there, you can see you can create text width and put in some blocks there. I can get the length of a certain string or text. I can just add some text there. I can convert something to uppercase. I can trim space. If I go to lists, I can create a list. I can get the length of lists. I can create a list with specific values. I can create an empty list. In a specific list, you can set a specific index value to a value or whatever you want to do there. So there's a lot of things that we can go and play around with. If you look at variables, we're going to create some variables now. You can look at functions, there's exceptions that you can use, and then if you go to Backendless, there's the user API to get the current user, to log out a user, and so forth. You can also go to the data API. We're going to use some of them here to load the data objects now, so we're going to use this one. So you can go and play around with these blocks and see what you can do with these blocks. Going to the messaging API, we can send mail, we can send a push notification from here as well. There's some geolocation type of blocks, there's file blocks, there's logging, there's counter, there's cache, there's network APIs, and then some errors. Right, and that's basically it for all of the blocks there. So we'll need to decide what we want to do, and then we can use those blocks. So let's start off by creating a few variables now. So I'm going to click on variables there, and I'm just going to say create a new variable. and then I can give the name of the variable. So one of the variables I'm going to use here is a full list, which will be a list that we're going to use in order to set to my list view later on. And that's basically the same list that I want to return from this service. So if I go to variables now, you can see there's the full list variable is created. So I can drag out this variable, and that's essentially what I want to return back. And you can see there, if I click on it, if I've got more than one variable, I can choose the variable I want to use here. So I'm going to leave full list there. And what I want to do is right at the start, I'm going to set my full list. So I'm going to just drag it in there inside of the service. That's the first thing we'll do. I'm going to set my full list to an empty list. So I'm going to go to lists, and then you can see there's create empty list, and I can just drag in the block there, which means that that full list that variable full list will be an empty list. Then I'm going to use another variable, and I'm going to call this variable offset. Now the offset variable there, I'm going to set the offset variable also to something. So just after that one, I'm going to set the offset variable to, and if I go to math, we'll see there's the one that you can set it to a specific value. So I'm going to set the offset to 0 right at the start. Now remember, the offset is where should we start extracting data from the table. So I want to start at the very first item, basically starting from the start of the table. I want to start retrieving objects. So I'm going to set the offset to 0 there. Then we also said in that data table called person, there was 350 objects. So I need to know how many objects there are. So I'm going to use a variable as well that's called object count. And that object count variable will help me to get the count of basically the number of objects inside of the table. So I'm going to set the object count to, now if I go to the data table or the data part there, data API, let's just see if we can get the object count there. You can see there's a block that will get you the object count. So I'm going to drag in the object count there. So I'm going to set object count to get object count in which table. Now your table name must be spelled exactly the same way as your table is actually spelled there, or what you type here must be the same spelling as your table. So that will be the person table. So by saying get object count, passing in the person table name there will give me the number of person objects in the person table. So this should return 350 now. And then setting the where clause, I'm not going to set a where clause there because I need everything in that table. Okay, so this is how you work with variables, basically setting them or changing them or whatever. So we set the full list to create an empty list. We set the offset to 0. We're going to start at the beginning, retrieving data. And then I'm setting the object count to getting the object count from the person table. Okay, so now the next part will be to set another variable. And this variable will be number of pages to extract. Now remember, you can only extract 100 objects per page, and that is the biggest number of values that you can extract from a table with one API. So we're going to set the number of pages to the following. Now in the math function, we've got that round. There's the round part there. So I want to round my answer here. And what should I round now? So I need to use the object count variable, because remember, if I've got 350 objects, what is the number of pages? It will be the number of objects, which is object count. So I'm going to use object count there. It will be object count, but object count should be divided by 100, because if I've got 350 objects divided by 100 gives me 3.5 pages. Round that up will give me 4, and that's the number of times I want to run the loop. Okay, so we need a math function there that will help us to divide by 100. So I'm going to use this block there. So this block, I'll pass in the object count there, and I want to say divide that object count by 100. Okay, and then please round that one up for me. So the object count, 350, divided by 100 will give 3.5. Round that up will give you 4 as the number of pages. And that's the number of times we need to retrieve a page from the table. Starting at offset 0, and we're going to change the offset as we go to every new page. Okay, then another variable that I'm going to use here is the sort variable. And that's how we want to sort our data. So I'm going to set the sort variable there. Just after that, we're going to set the sort variable to what we want to sort the data to, which column. So I'm going to use this text part there and drag it in there and say, well, I want to sort by the number, and typing is still something that's not working very nice on this thing. You start typing and then it just stops, and then you need to go into it again. But in any case, it's working. So I'm going to set the sort to sorting it by the number column. So remember, in my person table there, we had 3 columns: the surname column, the name column, and the number column. So I'm going to search by or sort by the number column. Okay, and then I also want to use a counter type of variable. So I'm going to create a variable called count. And I'm going to set the count to, let's go to math again. I'm going to set the count to 0. Okay, we'll see now how we're going to use that count variable. So these are the variables that I'm going to use and how I've initialized them. And now I can actually start running the loop. So I'm going to go to loops here. There's the loop, and I want to use the count with loop. So I'm going to use that one there as the first part of the loop. Count with I from where to where, and I'm incrementing by 1 at this stage. So where do we want to start there? You agree that we want to say count from I equals 0 to, then I want to have the number of pages there. So let me just use the variable. Let's just take any one of those and just change it to the number of pages. So basically I want to run this loop from I equals 0 to the number of pages. So this loop is going to run how many number of pages you've indicated there. So it's going to run 4 times. And then we're going to increment by 1 the whole time. Right now in the do part, that's in the loop. What do we want to do in the loop? So in the loop, I want to get 100 objects at a time. And then when I got that 100 objects, I want to add that 100 objects to my full list. So for this to work, I'm just going to create another list here. And I'm going to call this the person list. I'm going to say OK there. And then I'm going to set that person list inside of the loop. I'm going to set the person list to, and now I want to load the data from the table. So I'm going to go to the data API, and I'm going to load the data load the table objects. So I'm going to use that one. Now, what do we want to do here? The first thing there is the table name. I want to load or get the data from the person class or from the person table. And then I want to, you can add a where clause there. So let's add a where clause. Let's go to text, and I'm going to use that one there. And the where clause will be, let's just say where the name or the surname, doesn't really matter. Oh, really difficult to type. Name is not null. Okay, there we go. So we're going to go to the person table. Where the name is not null, we want to retrieve or load the table objects. And then you remember we've got the sort variable there. So I want to sort by that sort variable. So I'm going to go to variables and drag in the sort variable there. So I want to sort by number. Okay, and then the page size there should be 100. All right, so that's the page size, 100. And then the page offset there should be what? The offset that we've indicated right at the top. So we're going to start at 0, but we're going to increment that page offset the whole time. So the offset should start at 0. So I'm going to use that variable called offset, and that will be my offset there. Okay, so my page size will stay 100, but my offset will change, and that's why I'm using the variable there. So the very first 100 objects, the offset should start at 0. For the next 100 objects, the offset should start at 100. Okay, so this load table objects will go to the person table. We'll get all the objects where the name is not null, which is basically all of them, all 350. It will sort them. The page size will be 100, and we're going to start at position 0. Then after we've got that first 100 objects, we will set the offset variable. So I'm going to go and say set there. Directly after that, still in the loop, we're going to set the offset variable there to the previous value of the offset plus 100 to get the next 100. Okay, so what we need to do there is to use another math function there again. I'm going to use that top one again, and I'm going to drag it in there, and then saying, which one are we going to use there? Should be the offset. So it's going to be offset plus 100. Okay, so the first value of the offset, where is the offset now, was set to 0. It goes into the loop. It retrieves the first 100, and then we set the offset to be 0, the previous value of offset, plus 100, which will then become 100. And when the loop runs again, it will set the offset to 100 and get the next 100 objects. Right, so now in this loop, we've got the person list with the first 100 objects now. So what we want to do is to take the objects from person list and add them now to full list. Okay, so how do we do that? So the number of times that I need to run the loop now to place all of the person list objects into the full list will obviously be the length of the person list class, or the person list list, how many objects are in that one. So let's create another variable and call that one number of times to run loop. Right. And then I'm going to set that one. So I'm going to set the number of times to run the loop. I'm going to set that one to the length of the person list. So I'm going to go to lists, and there's a length method, or a length one that you can use there. Length of, and then the variable, which is going to be person list there. Okay, so the number of times to run the loop now in order to take every object in person list and place it into full list will be the length of the person list. So for the very first time, obviously that size will be 100. So now let's run a loop in order to place all the objects in person list currently into full list. Okay, so let's go to loops, and we're going to go with this one again. So it's still inside this loop, but inside that loop, we're going to start with count I. Let's create another variable there called j now. Just call it j, and I can use j then there. So I'm going to use j there. Count with j from 0, obviously, because my list starts at position 0. From 0 to the number of times I want to run the loop. So the variable's there, number of times to run the loop. Drag in there. So count with j from 0 to the number of times to run the loop and increment by 1. So that's exactly what we want. Now inside of this loop now, we want to add all of the objects in person list to full list. So at the lists, you'll find one that says in list insert at. So in the list, let's try this one quickly. So I'll place that one there, and I'm going to say in the list called full list, I'm going to say insert at a specific position. At which position now? Now you remember that we had a count variable there. So I'm going to use that count variable to add into full list, and the j variable to run through the person list. So I'm going to say in list full list, insert at which position. So the position I want to insert at is into the count position. So you agree that right from the start, count will be 0. So the very first time this loop runs, your count variable there will be 0. So in list full list, insert at that position 0, and what do I want to insert now. That's the last part. So let's go to lists again, and I want to use this one that says in list get. So let's just add that one there. So I'm going to say in list, and this one is now the person list. In the person list, get position, and the variable I want to use there is J now. Let's just use J there. Okay. So right, when this loop runs then, it's going to run the number of times to run the loop, which is the length of the person list. So every time it runs in the list called full list, insert at position count, which is 0 there at the start. What should I insert? In the person list, get the object at position J. And that, when the loop runs for the first time, will be at position 0. So it's going to say in person list position 0, add to full list position 0 that object. Okay, and so when the loop runs, we'll need to obviously also increment the count there. And that's the next one that we should do there. So I'm going to say variables, not variables. Yeah, let's go to variables. Let's say change count by 1. So we're going to go there and say, and that's exactly what we actually want to do there. There we set count to 0, and there we change count by 1. If I say -1, it will deduct. If I say just 1 there, it will increment by 1. So I'm going to change count by 1. So every time it inserts, it will insert at the new count. And you can see that count will even go beyond 100 up until 350 right at the end. Okay, so I think we're basically done for this thing to get all the data that we want. And you can see then when these loops are done, we return the full list. So if you want to test this out now, you can obviously zoom in and out here to check the whole thing. So if I want to test this out now, I can go and say deploy there. You can see it says deploy complete, service new logic has been deployed to production. So now this service is actually live. If I go to API services now, and you can see there's my service, retrieve data. And if I say invoke now, it runs the service for me. And remember now, it should have my data sorted. And you can see it's okay, there's no errors. And it should be sorted by the number. So there's the first one, 1, 2, and if we go down 3, 4, 5, I'm going to scroll down a lot because there's going to be 350 of them. So you can test out to see, because the first 100 objects will obviously be sorted and be correct. So from 99 to 100 to 101. So the next page was extracted successfully. So let's go down up until the next page, which starts at 200 basically. 95, 96, 97, 98, 99. There's 200. So let's go down, see if we can get to 300 there. There's 294, 295. There's 300. And then the last is also sorted up until where we get to object number 350. Okay, I see they've got some null values there, but don't worry there. So you can see that we've got all 350 objects in this call. So this is a nice way of testing your coding online and making sure that you've got the correct output. And now if your output is exactly what you want and you know it's now working correctly, then let's go and download that SDK. So I'm going to download the Java Android SDK there, and it says your download will start in a few seconds, and then it downloads your application or your SDK for you, and you can use the classes there. Okay, so now after downloading your SDK, you'll get a folder after unzipping it. So mine is called Retrieve Data, which is the same name as my service online. So you'll see the service name is Retrieve Data. So that's the name of the file that I got there. So it's Retrieve Data or the folder. And then inside I've got the library for Backendless. But remember, we already did some videos on how to set up Backendless, so it's not needed this jar file. And if you're going to the source directly, this is basically the files that we need. We need these two, or basically only retrieve data. This is an example of how you can basically get your data. So I'm only going to use retrieve data there. So I'm going to copy it, copy retrieve data. And then I've created a new Android application where I'm going to paste that class. So I'm just going to paste that class there, and we're going to have a look at it now. So just my normal Android application there. In my application class, I've got my init app, setting the URL and initializing my app. In the manifest file, I've got the permission to use the internet. I've linked my application class. And then very important, under build.gradle, I've got the compile statement for the Backendless library. So that's just setting up your application, like in one of my first videos that I've shown you how to set up Backendless. Okay, so now as part of this class that was passed in, let me just have a look at the main activity quickly. My main activity, you'll see, is just basically showing a list view. So I want to show all 350 objects in a list view. So I called the list view LV people. I've set up the list view there and connected to that list view. And then also I want to set this, basically the people objects now to the list, but you can't set objects there. So you need some type of string there. So I'm going to create a string called list, or a string list called list. And I've just initialized the list. And essentially, we're going to take this list and place it into the list view. Okay, so let's see what is the data that we got from that SDK that we downloaded from the website. So this is the file retrieve data. This is my service. You'll see that they call this init application. So I'm not going to run this init application at all. Because we've done initializing the application in the application class already, which also means that I don't need this variable there as the host, and I also don't need those two. Right, so we only need the service name. We need those methods. This is a Java method, so we can actually delete this method as well. Remember that we're using the async methods for Android. So this is the only thing that you need to basically get your service working. Now let's just look at the other class we've got there. We've got an invocation example there. So if we open up that one, you can see that they want us to initialize the application and then to get an instance. So I'm just going to use that one line to get the instance. So let's go back to Android now, and just in my main activity, that's one line I need to use there. So I'm going to say retrieve data, whatever I want to call it, equals retrieve data dot get instance. And that will basically get me an instance there. And now I can call this method that will get me everything I need. Okay, so after this, let's call that method. So I'm going to say retrieve data dot get all data from person table async. And now if you look at this one, it accepts a callback there, or an async callback. So that's what we're going to do there. We're going to say new async callback, and it's of type object. And then there we're going to say code override methods, and we want the handle response and the handle fault, which will create that for us. Right, and that's basically it. So it's saying retrieve data, get all data from person table async, which is in this class, this one calling this one. And then when it goes to handle response, we've got an object. Now, this is just a bit weird, and they are working on this in Backendless to get us the correct output for our data. So if we go back to the website, you can see that we are returning, in fact, the variable called full list, which was declared as a list right at the top. So which means that if I go back to my Android application, this response that I get there is in fact a list. So how do I get the list from this object? So we're going to start with saying object, let's just call it result, equals, now I'm going to cast this one to an object array. I'm going to say object array, and then say response. Then I'll say list, let's say list there of type object, and let's call it people, equals arrays, which is from java.util, and we're going to call as list. So create this as a list for us, and I'm going to pass in that result variable. And that will create now a list of objects, and this objects will actually be person objects. But for now, it's just of type object, and we can cast it now to what we want. Let's run a loop here. So I'm going to say for integer I equals 0, I less than this people list dot size, and then I plus plus. Right, so now inside of this for loop, I first want to check there, because I've seen there on the printout there, we've got a few nulls there right at the bottom. So I just want to make sure I'm not adding that nulls as part of this list. So I'm going to say if people, which is the list, dot get I, which gets the object, or at that specific position, if that one is not equal to null, then we'll start adding those objects to the list at the top. So that list is declared as a string. So let's just set up that string. So I'm going to say list.add. And what do I want to add now? What do I want to show in every item in the list view? So there's the list view. In every item in the list view, what do I want to show there? So I'm going to say list.add. So basically I want to say people.getI, which will get the object. But now this object is now of type object, and I need to have it as type person. So I'm going to cast it to a person object, and then I'm just going to add another bracket there and close it off, and then on this whole thing after that one I'm going to call, and now you can see I'm working with a person object. So I'm going to say people.getI, which is a normal object, cast that object to a person object, and on that person object now I can call get name, get surname, or whatever. So there's get number, get name, and get surname. So let's start off with the number. So I'm going to get the number first, but that's an integer, and that's why it's giving me a problem there. So then let's just add some text there, and you can see the problem is gone. Okay, so let's say we're going to add a colon there, and then for the next value we're going to have declaring also, or casting it to a person object, again people.getI, which is the object, and then on the object I'm going to call, let's say, get name first. So I'm going to show the guy's name, and then we can add a comma there, and let's just display then person people.getI, which will get the object dot, let's say, get surname for this one. Just go to a new line there. Okay, so now we've got list.add. We will first show the number, then a colon, then get name, then get surname. So that is if the object is not null or not referring to null, then we will add this to the list. And then after this, we can now go to the list view, LV people, and we can go and set the adapter. And the adapter will be a new array adapter of type string, because my list that I've created there is of type string. Then let's go to the arguments, parameters there. So I'm going to say get application context, second argument. Let's just use some Android resources there. So I'm going to go to android.r.layout.simple list item 1. And then for the last argument, I'm going to pass in my list, and that will set the list view to the list. Okay, now in the handle fault, we can just show a toast there by saying, let's say error plus fault dot get message. Okay, so let's run this application and see what we get. So I'm going to run this on the virtual device quickly. Okay, so here the application starts now. So I'm not showing a progress dialog there, and I see there's an exception now. So let's just quickly have a look at the exception there. And it says there that java.util.hashmap cannot be cast to this one. Okay, so it's a simple solution for this one. And what we need to do is, just before we start using our service, we need to tell this service basically now that our person class and the person table on Backendless, it should be mapped so that we can basically say that they are the same thing. So just make sure that you've got your person class there. So you must have the class that corresponds to your table online. So there's my person class. You can see it's got a name, a surname, and a number. So it must correspond directly to what you've got on Backendless. And then we're just going to say Backendless dot data dot, okay, alt enter for your import there, dot map table to class. And then we're going to say this table called person should be mapped to the class called person dot class. And now this should work. So basically I'm telling Backendless here, the person table should be mapped to my person class. It's the same thing. So if I run this now again, let's just see if it works now. Okay, so the activity is running again. Again, we don't see any progress bar or anything. And there's my list view. And for some reason, the text is white. Then let's just go there just for this example now. Just go and set the background color for this thing quickly. Okay, so I'm going to go there. Let's set the color to be a black and say okay. And let's run this again. Okay, so let's try this again. There it launches the activity, and there it starts showing my data. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up until 12, and so it carries on. So it's the number, then a colon, then the guy's name, and then the surname. So from my data table now called person, I think I've got all the objects. So you can see from 99 to 100, 101 went fine. It's sorted. Did I go too fast now? Let me just go back again. Just start from the start. There's 1 to the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and so forth. There's the 100s, sorted fine, sorted by the number there. And then if we carry on, there we go into the 200s. Let's just move up. And there's the 300s, 100%, and then we stop at 350. That's the last one. Okay, so it seems that if, it seems as if my application is working 100%, and basically I am using this service that I built online on Backendless with the coding right here, but I'm using my own coding in Android in order to retrieve that specific service and the method for that service. So Backendless guys are working on this to make this a bit easier, that we don't need to do all of these casting here. So hopefully with the new update that's coming out, we will, when we call get all data from person table async, it will already have a list of type person in there, which will be very easy so that we can just add our data to the list. Okay, so that's it for Codeless programming. Maybe we'll do some more videos on that, but this is just an introduction to it and basically replicating one of the previous videos I did with normal Android coding, now done in Codeless.